Welcome back to Count Me In, the podcast that brings you inside the fascinating world of management accounting. Few industries have more interesting or infamous background than cannabis. From a management accountant's perspective, it's the story straight out of the Wild West of business. Joining me today is Simone Cimiluca-Radzins, a leading consultant in the cannabis industry. We discuss her unique journey from a Big Four CPA to bringing accounting and finance order to untamed businesses in cannabis country. Let's start the conversation. Simone, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I'm really excited to be talking about cannabis and accounting and counting in the cannabis industry. But to start off, I want to find out, how did you get into this industry and what's your story?
Adam, I'm so excited to also be on. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I am an accountant by nature. I grew up in a family where my dad is an accountant, a controller, did the whole kind of accounting route. And it just was the thing that just made sense. Going up in college, I was like, oh, accounting's easy. Let me go do this. And then got recruited pretty young in university to be part of PwC. And then it almost felt like my career path was kind of just set. Maybe luck, maybe opportunity, the combination of all of that. And I did a few different corporate accounting type of jobs, got to travel the entire world, which was amazing, doing internal audit for one of the large studios down in Los Angeles, and then moving to Paris for a few years and being able to do international consulting. I've always focused on accounting, right? So internal control development, processes, process improvement. But it was nice because at that point, at the very end of my corporate tenure, I guess we can say, it was an opportunity to really see how I could truly be an advisor and truly implement things instead of just telling people, hey, you know what, you've got all of these control problems and see you later, here's your audit report. And so that was a really nice kind of end towards my corporate tenure. And yeah, I think you probably hear it often that some people just get burned out. And doing international consulting, that's how I felt. It was, and it's funny saying it because it was such a dream when it was there. But then at the very end, it was like 2 weeks in Paris, 2 weeks somewhere else in the world. And you're battling jet lag. I'm in my mid 20s at this point, almost like late 20s, I guess. And you're kind of like, well, hold on, I want to hang out with people. I want to have friends. Like this is so fun. But at the same time, I feel like there's something more. And, I decided to quit my job and I lost my visa living in Europe. I lost my visa and I went back to the US and started freelancing from one of my, previous jobs. But it was a really great freelance gig. And that started to get me into freelance and understanding, wow, okay, this is really cool. Like I have to do my deliverables and I can kind of just maybe build something on my own. And that's when I think the entrepreneurial bug started, where I was like, I think that there's something more, but I didn't know what that more is. And in the end, I think I'm just getting there, right? And so that's like, oh, this is a while. So I guess to any listener who's feeling that, it's okay to feel like you might not really know exactly what you want, but that there is something more. But freelancing, it was just a great opportunity. I can make better money than I was making in my corporate gig. And I had just moved to LA. And so I got a subscription to magazines. I don't know if people still get that, but when you move into a new place, you can get all these magazines. And I got this one. There was on the front cover, women in the marijuana industry. And I was like, what? Now I'd been in Europe. I'd been in finance. I hadn't thought about, and it was marijuana then. I call it cannabis now. It's, the real term that you want to use. I hadn't thought about weed, cannabis, marijuana since I was in high school. And I was like, this is interesting. And I started really diving into what is this industry. And at that time, it's 2015. And so if we just roll back, there's not even 2 states that have legalized adult use.
Mm-hmm.
Some obviously have legalized medical use, but so it's all brand new. I'm in California, which is the Wild West, which is the biggest market in the entire world. And I just started doing this research about like so I'm an auditor. I was like, okay, let me understand the ecosystem, just like I would a business. I was like, okay, let me understand the players, what is happening, like what is the supply chain and all of that. And I just thought to myself, okay, I think this is the industry that I want to be in. And before I even got on my own, I thought, okay, but how do you really learn it? You learn it through the numbers, just like I learned every other business, right?
Yeah.
Like if you can understand numbers, you can understand how everything works. So I approached a CPA firm that was very cannabis, like it was very clear they were working in the cannabis industry, which is not, was not at that time something that you would promote. And I said, hey, I can help you. I can help you with your sales. I can help you, build, better process. And I had a little bit less than a year working with them until I felt really confident that I could just go out on my own and start kind of building my own business and start kind of working on different projects in the cannabis space. So that's how I got in.
Wow, that's amazing. So when you got in, it was still largely a cash industry, right? So I can only imagine
Yes.
how crazy that was, because everything is digital currencies and all that stuff, and the world of business today, even in 2015 it still was.
Yeah.
And now, and in that time, how did you manage that?
Well, so the interesting thing is, so there's twofold. There's about 80% of businesses still lack banking today in 2022.
Wow.
So you really have to have a good set of internal controls,
Yep.
and working with those businesses, even in 2015, you kind of just boil it back to the basics. But what's fascinating is that there's almost something that you could call legacy industry, meaning operators that had been in the business before it was quote unquote legal in that state. Right. So
Okay.
had probably got involved in, if you think about California, there was an ability to truly build a business, even though it was a cooperative model, starting in 1996 when there was the first dispensary.
Okay.
But from a federal perspective, and there's still a lot of federal issues, they were not supposed to hold their receipts. They were supposed to erase everything, which is an accountant's worst nightmare.
Wow. I can only
So,
imagine.
yeah, so it was a lot of education, and it still is a lot of education of, I almost think this is small business of, hey, we have to save receipts. Now, when it's cash, we don't have the law. We don't have bank statements that can get sucked up into the accounting system to even know what completeness is. No, we had to, you really have to show people like this is very important. So, I mean, the process was a lot of education and then system building, but very archaic is the thing that comes to mind, but very simple system building because, it's small business owner. Well, just I would say like limited business systems with the businesses that were operating all in
Okay.
cash. So it's really focused on the simple education, the easy to do type of, hey, how do you upload these receipts type of thing. But what's interesting, are you aware of IRC 280E?
I've heard it. I'm not aware of it. I'm not aware, like, to define it. No.
So this is one of the most draconian laws you can ever imagine. It was put into place in 1982 because a drug dealer, filed his taxes, and he was dealing with like meth, like bigger drugs. And this is, predating what the cannabis industry is now, but it hasn't changed. And the rule is that if you are trafficking in a controlled substance, a Schedule 1 or 2 substance, and so cannabis is a 1, which is really insane because heroin is a 1, and there just needs to be some push at the CSA and getting this scheduled. But if you're trafficking in a controlled substance, 1 or 2,
Yeah.
you cannot deduct anything. No business deductions. Now, there's been IRS take tax law that allows a business to
Wow.
deduct their cost of goods sold. So it's actually from the federal level, the only deduction that a business can take is a deduction to gross receipts, which is cost of goods sold. So at a state level, it's different. Every state will say, hey, we allow you to take all full deductions like any other business. Like that's how a state should do it. So these businesses are really hit hard because of working all in cash. Oh, I'm forgetting to save all my receipts. But at a federal level, they're still struggling because they can't deduct everything, meaning cash flow is impacted.
Wow. So your cash flow is greatly impacted, and you can't take advantage of all the great fintech that's out there for the accountants. And so what are some of the
Yeah.
nuances that you have to do? So obviously uploading receipts is a big one to try to get them in there, but then also there's also the stuff that they do on this, like
on the side? I don't know. There's so many different intricacies in there. How can you as like how do accountants help? How can accountants help these small businesses as they get in there?
Well, I think the first thing is the accountant needs to adopt the mindset that I am a true business advisor here and I'm an educator. I'm not just doing bookkeeping. I'm not just doing accounting. I'm not going to be reactive. If they haven't sent me something, I'm not going to do it. It's like a very proactive approach to being a true business advisor and part of the team. So that's like the first thing. And that, hey, we're going to solve the problem. And so I think if you are thinking about building your accountant toolbox, you're like, okay, well, I'm aware of these bigger blocks, right? So the IRC 280E, okay, that's state, that's federal taxes.
Yeah.
Then really understanding state taxes and then getting them set up immediately on a business system, right? And so a lot of operators that, I don't work as much now with operators in doing accounting. I do a lot of fundraising, but a lot of operators, when I was working with them, really are even struggling to have like an accounting system in place. So these basic things. So the first thing is understanding the business and then understanding inventory, because inventory is everything. And it's how do you manage? So being very, up to date on cost accounting, management accounting, because if you're working with a cultivator or a manufacturer, we've got a lot of different inputs in our inventory, versus a reseller where it's just like, okay, I bought this. If I have to add on maybe some freight, then I'll add on freight to get to an inventory cost. So there's a lot of just the basics and being able to go in, roll up your sleeves, work with the CEO, as I consider you a profit advisor, and getting the systems dialed in. And then training is so important. Really being able to delegate those roles to the business operators or somebody on the business operations team. Like I've seen accountants that have been like, oh, I'm going to take on everything. I'm going to do the invoicing. I'm going to do, no, you can't. You have to make sure that you really are taking the role of a profit advisor. Or if you're just, bookkeeping or doing freelance kind of financial consulting, that you really can almost segregate your duties with somebody else on the team.
Yeah. Well, that goes back to having setting up good internal control. And I'm sure that those small businesses, as they're getting into this industry, especially if they were doing stuff beforehand and then it's suddenly legal and they're like, oh, I'm going to get a legitimate business. I don't think they had good internal controls set up. They probably didn't have very good business practices set up. So it's almost like as a business partner, you're coming in as the CFO, as a financial analyst, as a data analyst. You're coming in as all the roles that that an accountant does in an organization, that like a management accountant does. And you're having to set all that up for this business. And I can't imagine that's easy at all.
It's not easy. And I think the big thing that I learned was like setting boundaries and setting expectations, setting boundaries. And so, one thing that in the industry specifically, because there's so much innovation, there is something new, there's something changing all of the time. There's new states that are onboarding and there's so much. It's very easy as entrepreneurs in that space to get caught up in all of the shiny objects. And so as an accountant, if you kind of follow that suit, you're not really helping the business. And so it's very important to, set the expectations, be nimble, be nimble because, there are pivots. It's all of it is the startup culture, but really practicing discernment and having, almost a plan, right? The project plan of, okay, here's where you are. Well, this is where we can try to get to you in 12 months, and bit by bit going there with it's just the focus of really building internal controls. I think that was the coolest thing when I got into the industry. I was like, oh my gosh, this is like all of my corporate tenure. Like all of what I've learned, you can actually apply into this space. So, but for me, it really is internal controls.
I mean, that's great. So IMA, Institute of Management Accountants, is one of the core founders of the COSO, which is the Council on Sponsoring Commissions, which came out with that internal control. And so we're big into internal controls here. And so like, I think management accountants could be a huge into this industry. And so what if somebody wanted to get started in this industry? Should they go find a small cannabis shop and say, hey, can I come and be your accountant? Or should they, be an entrepreneur like you? What would you recommend?
Well, I'd first recommend getting educated. So making sure that you feel very comfortable about the state taxes, the federal taxes, what systems you would use, and kind of your game plan. And then you made a really great point, is that within that education, the cannabis industry is quite complex. We're talking agriculture, manufacturer, retailers, right? And so being able to service all of these, well, all of these different license types or parts of the supply chain, they have very different pain points. And they have very different, even accounting, if you think about it. Like an agricultural business is going to have very different accounting than a retail business. So first understanding, where do you want to play in this field? And then if they decide to go, the job route, oh my gosh, I always have Indeed, like I have a RSS feed, Indeed Cannabis Accounting. There's tons of jobs. There's always tons of jobs. So there's an opportunity to do that. Or if you're thinking about the freelance route, then, finding kind of an approach to reaching out to somebody in your local area. I know there's a lot of remote accountants right now, which is, I'm in Portugal at the moment. And I think that the coolest thing for me about being in the industry was being able to connect locally with business operators. And because you're really heavily involved, if you're in quote unquote an emerging market, which would be like New York, for example, like licensing is about to happen, regulation is passed, like there's just this environment of like what is happening, then you really, if you can, you want to be there and you want to be part of it. You want to go to local events that are organized by community organizations. You want to, what was so cool for me is like getting involved in the politics. Like this is something where you have an ability to, talk to legislators about, do you really like the regulation? Is the regulation set up for success from an accounting perspective? And it's something that I'm even working on, even remotely. But I would say if somebody is in a state where there is adult use or medical use, try to find out what's happening locally and just get your feet wet. Just how I did it, be that researcher, ask so many questions, because this is like, from a business perspective, such a fascinating industry. From an accounting perspective, such a fascinating industry. But from a health and a wellness perspective, it is just fantastic of what you can be part of by supporting these businesses that are, helping people with their pain, helping people with their anxiety, helping people, with feeling better. And so there's so much that somebody can do just if they're interested, is just get involved locally.
That's great. I think that's a great way to get started, is just kind of start where you are and then kind of go from there. I mean, that's how everybody gets started, really. I mean, you just find people to talk to, get involved in events, find local things that you can, local shops, local conferences that are happening. Because I know it's all happening all over the place, which is amazing. And what I was thinking as you were talking, the more good accounting that can get into this industry, that set up a good foundation. So that someday, I hope, when federally they finally say, you know what, we should take this off the Schedule 1 or whatever it is, that there'll be good accounting in place. So that way, when the federal regulations come into play, the accountants will be like, we got this.
Exactly. Well, not only that, if you think about just small business and some of the statistics, small businesses tend to go out of business within 5 years. Like, I think it's like more than 80%, which is a devastating number. And I believe operating in the cannabis industry, it's even harder because of the punitive taxes, because of, the cash flow issues. And so having good accountants into this space and helping these small businesses withstand the storm of, still we're in federal prohibition, right? Federal prohibition to get to a day, and hopefully it's a year very soon, where there is an opportunity where it's completely federally legal, would be great for the small business owner, right? To be able to like be part of this industry and make it all the way to federal legalization. And I believe accountants that are true profit advisors are the ones that can actually do that.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, as an accountant, you're kind of forced to go back to your roots of, like you said, like the first things you did when you're corporate accounting, even just things like cash flow management, like something as simple, it's a very popular course at IMA, cash flow, because people still have to remind themselves, okay, what I'm like, it's crazy, but when you're dealing with cash flow it's actual literally cash in and out.
Yeah, right. It's cash flow, it's cash management. Like, what are we actually going to do with this money? But then it's also safeguarding assets. Think about it. Cannabis businesses, tons of cash, tons of cannabis. Frauds happen we already know small businesses have a lot of fraud.
Yeah.
And so imagine if you're in a cannabis industry that has limited a cannabis business that has limited internal controls. It's a haven. It stresses me out, honestly, as a former auditor, of
Yeah.
like just like the lack of controls and the opportunity to commit fraud. And then what is really interesting and quite negative in the fact of being interesting is that IRC 280E. Well, what you cannot deduct anything besides your cost of goods sold. So you cannot deduct losses. So if there's shrinkage, if you have a loss, that's not cost of goods sold. That is a loss. And you can't at the federal level actually book that loss.
Wow.
So exactly. So it's to me, it's getting as many accountants educated to help get those businesses profitable to really to make it towards federal legalization.
Definitely. Well, and I can only imagine the hardship that would put on a small business, especially if there's fraud, if there's, I mean, even for individual consumers, if you get wire frauded, the bank says, well, sorry, that's our little loophole in the FDIC. We're not going to help you because you were wire frauded. There's nothing we can do if we can't get the money back. And so it's I feel like there's so many, when fraud happens, there's not much help out there for many people.
No. And I think that is such the very sad part of the equation. And I think the silver lining to that is, well, education and preventative controls and really educating somebody about that. And I think that what happens in small business and in cannabis is all small business and startup is that people don't want to prioritize that because it's not sexy.
Yep.
And that's why the accountant we have to be proactive with it and we have to make it fun. And I think just showing people like, hey, we can work together and I can actually help you save money, meaning more profit for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the big thing.
I agree. Anything else you want to share?
Well, I think that I want to share with every listener just a little bit of a history about the cannabis industry, because that was one of the interesting things when I got involved with it. I really learned a lot. I learned a lot about politics. I learned a lot about health. And I learned actually a lot about myself, which is not the point of the history of cannabis, but it's been federally prohibited for a very long time. And in 1995, there wasn't a single dispensary in the United States. Like California legalized medical use in 1996. And then from there, we have seen like such accelerated growth. And one of the most important things that I've seen with new legislation is that there's a lot of things, a lot of rules or programs in place that really help with what had happened with the war on drugs, because minorities, people of color were really impacted by the war on drugs. And, by receiving a federal, like if you are impacted by the war on drugs, so what's that mean? You might have had to go to jail just for having a small amount of weed on you. And now that's completely legal in most states. But what happens with that is that if you have gone to prison, you can't vote. So there's a lot of interesting things that the cannabis industry and legalization of the cannabis industry is bringing from a political perspective that I just wanted to share with everybody, that it's a really cool opportunity to be part of an industry that is a game changing. That is like the rules haven't been fully written yet. And you have an opportunity, if you care about politics or if you care about, making a change in the system, the cannabis is like a very, very cool industry to do that. And from the health perspective, if you don't know much about the plant, it's much more than just getting you high. Like people have been able to help and cure cancers, just like end their stress and their anxiety. And there's kids with epilepsy that have used cannabis that now don't have seizures. And like the list goes on. And what's very cool about the cannabis plant is that research, like there was a bunch of Israeli researchers that in the 1990s discovered in our body the endocannabinoid system, which is similar to like your pulmonary system or your nervous system. Like it's a system in your body that has been discovered since the 1990s that helps you build homeostasis in your body. And cannabis, THC being the primary, molecule into cannabis, is something that actually, binds to our endocannabinoid system. So what's really cool about this is that, growing up in the finance world and being part of corporate finance, it was a heavily drinking culture. I really didn't open my mind to these other, plant medicines and like what are the opportunities. And so I just, if you're curious at all about that, just do some Google research, endocannabinoid system, and what are the benefits of cannabis, because it's so much more than, eating weed brownies and like stone it out on your couch. Like it's really a plant that can save lives.
And I 100% agree with that statement. And Simone, I thank you so much for coming on this podcast. It's been very educational, and I hope our audience enjoyed it as much as I did.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Adam.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.